couple minutes late. Many hands make for lighter work though. So thank you very much for helping us with the seats. Yeah. Again, my name is Eric Bredfeld, and I've been, I don't think I'm actually the pilot on this, I'm the co-pilot, so I'll just say I'm the co-pilot on this study. My colleague George Kramer, who's here, is, I call him the pilot, basically.
I'm just hearing this for the first time, by the way.
I'm the wingman. We wanted to thank you all for spending some time with us tonight, and we are in Town Hall number 8 this evening. We had a town hall last night in Laurel Hill, and as I said to folks last night, we were going to cover some of the same information today. It's somewhat a little bit different, and then we're going to ask for your input and assistance after we go through some slides here. Okay? Can everybody hear me okay? Okay. So, we have published, since the last time we met on July 15th, we published 2 more of the reports on the project website for this project. And if you remember, this study, as for some of you who may have not been at all the town halls, this study has a project website, and it's called, if you Google North Okaloosa Inspire, you can bring up that project website, and it's where all of the a calendar on the events are, and then we actually put all the publications up on that website, and then we have a email address that you can comment on the reports or any other aspects of the study as we're working on them, which folks have been doing as we've gone through this. And I would encourage you to continue to do if you'd like to. So the two reports that we put on the website on August 5th were called Capital Improvements Report and the Development Constraints. We're gonna talk a little bit more about the development constraints tonight. Some of you who were here last night saw that, because it's sort of like we're gonna use it as a jumping off point into some of the local planning analysis, and that's gonna really be seeking your input on some things, because we really need your input on some things to advance some of our work. So this report, as the others were specifically requested as per the request for proposal that went out on this project back in last year, actually. And so in development constraints, we're talking about where things should occur and where things may not occur. The dates depending on either constraints or opportunities. And so the methodology for this report, and again, you can review this report later or at your leisure, is to identify constraints and then opportunities in terms of helping us decide what parts of the North County area are appropriate for development over time. So we looked at constraints, and we looked at basically 3 constraints. And those constraints, the first one is environmental sensitivity. So areas of environmental sensitivity that are in the North County would be areas that we would typically say we wouldn't want a lot of development to occur there. And the components of that are, and really dictated by the geography of the area and the natural features that are given, particularly the riverways, the Blackwater State Forest, and some of the other features. So when we talk about the elements of environmental features, the first one we talk about is hydrology. about how water is moving through the area, the flood areas, particularly that surround the rivers, and probably wouldn't be that appropriate for development over time. We talk about wetlands and wetland features that would, in some cases, follow the contours of the rivers, but then also be scattered throughout the study area. And we talk about habitat areas for, could be rare species or species that have some type of protection in state law or in other laws or regulations. So that's basically one constraint. The second constraint we talked about and featured in the report is, agricultural suitability, and we've had the discussion before about prime farmland. Kind of hard to see in this slide, but there is a definition of prime farmland that the USDA puts out, and that is the basis of the prime farmland designation. It has to do with the character of the land, the soils that make up the land, etc. And this is kind of acknowledged already in the comprehensive plan for the county, because there's a prohibition on developing at a certain density. The maximum you can go in prime farmland is 1 unit per 10 acres, actually. Okay, so that's another development constraint. And that prime farmland we've mapped in the report as well. And then the last one that we all know about, and we experience, you all experience often as you live here. We experience when we come here. We just drove through it earlier today, but is Eglin Air Force Base, and basically not only the area that's directly adjacent to Eglin Air Force Base, which is denoted already and controlled for and defined as this Eglin encroachment area, which lies just to the south of I-10. But of course, there's all kinds of maneuvers that are going on over the county. And some of these lines, these hatched lines and these colored lines, they represent those maneuvering areas. And that has some constraints on development, because you're not really supposed to be doing certain types of development at certain restricted heights and things like that. So the development potential is heavily impacted by all of these three constraints. Another constraint is, property rights are a given in that there's something that property owners have. They can be something that we just have to be cognizant of, that has to be taken into account as we decide upon what course we're going to take, because as we all know, there are certain constitutional and state legislative protections for property rights. Either the Fifth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, and/or we've talked about in many regards the Byrd-Harris Act that protects, is another layer of private property protection that is in the state. And also, I think we mentioned at the last meeting, the requirement of comprehensive plans now is that one of the elements has to have you have to have a private property element in your comprehensive plan, which Okaloosa County does as well. And then we kind of contrast that with where are the opportunities for development. We talk about those a little bit. And there are three, basically. The first is areas in the county that have either planned or existing infrastructure. And those would be things like, infrastructure being roads. Usually we talk about provision of water, provision of sewer. We've acknowledged in a couple of the reports that septic is a state allowable alternative for the provision of infrastructure. So all of those things go into development opportunities, particularly where you have the existing infrastructure in place. The county and the Economic Development Agency in the county have identified this area called the Shoal River Ranch Gigasite, which is lying to the east of Crestview, basically. And that's an area that the county and the Okaloosa Economic Development Council is basically attempting to try to draw in job development over time. So that has been identified as an area where the county and the Economic Development Agency seeks to build additional jobs in the job base. And then the last one we're going to talk about a little bit more as we get to the end of this presentation is this urban development boundary, which is a existing urban growth tool that's in the existing comprehensive plan right now, and is an area where typically within an urban development boundary you would have the majority of your urban type services, and by designating the area as an urban development boundary, you're basically suggesting that in that area you're presuming that development is going to occur in some type of urban form. Okay? And when we say urban form, we mean a little bit more dense. It could be a little bit more vertical. It could be a tighter and more compact. But those are kind of the things we think about when we're talking about urban development. And so when we put all these development constraints and development opportunities together, we are kind of thinking through as a consultant to the county, coming up with a recommendation that focuses on a tiered approach to future growth and development. And the tiered approach has there are actually three tiers in the system, okay? Tier one basically would be the existing urban development boundary that's already identified by the county in the comprehensive plan. It's already in there. And as we said, that's usually and typically a place where you have existing infrastructure that would support the land uses. It would be a place where you could get increased density because you could tie into that particular infrastructure. And right now, I'm going to show you a map in a little bit that kind of shows where that urban development boundary is. It's kind of exhibited up on these maps as well, so we can talk about that a little bit. But so the tier one would be sort of the core where there's a majority of your infrastructure. Tier two would be areas sort of outside of the area of tier one. That would be sort of a transitional area. And that area would be where you may have some infrastructure, but you may have some infrastructure that's planned and is coming, but is not in the ground. And the idea would be, in those areas, you could develop at the existing intensity, but you really couldn't develop at increased intensity unless you tied into the infrastructure that's planned. Okay? The tiers are not built in. The only thing that's built into the system right now in the existing comprehensive plan is the urban development boundary. Okay, and I'm gonna show a map to make sure you understand where it is. And then basically tier 3 is everything else. And the idea in everything else is that's basically your agricultural area and your area north, east, west, that exhibits a more rural or agricultural character and probably is not going to be served by higher levels of infrastructure. Because again, the infrastructure normally is going to be built close in to your existing urban flow. Okay? So in terms of the local planning analysis, we kind of, again, we're emphasizing those constraints. And by the way, when we're looking at the local planning analysis, it's basically written in the RFP that we have to look at this through development constraints as established in this particular report and the key findings in task 1, which were these 3 key findings that came out of the public report that we presented to the county commission in May, which many of you attended, and which the county commission adopted unanimously. So that's the context. The context is we have to be cognizant of the constraints, and we have to look at this in consideration of these findings. Okay? And again, we're stressing that we think we should move to this tiered system. Okay? And then the other thing we want to talk about a little bit more tonight is an existing policy that's in the comprehensive plan. So this is not something that we're coming at with fresh. This is already in the comprehensive plan. And the comprehensive plan identifies what are called rural community overlays. Okay? And basically, those are areas that are going to promote infill development. When we say infill development, we mean like you have development that's already there, but you're going to infill things around the existing development. And then it's intended to make available basic services to residents in the rural community and the surrounding rural area. And it kind of lists what those services are: retail sales and community kind of institutions like community centers and public safety. And then it's indicated that the overlay is further intended to provide areas for more compact residential developments while preserving the rural nature and character of areas that lie outside of that rural overlay. Okay. This is in the comprehensive plan. That's the policy 10.1B.
Is Baker and Colby identified as those places?
I'm going to show you the map. Yes. Did everybody hear those questions? The question was, is this policy in the comprehensive plan? The answer is yes, it is. And then the question was, are these overlays already shown on the map for Baker and Holt? The answer is yes, they are. So what you're seeing, so we have 3 maps basically. We have maps, and you're going to see the same maps here. 3 maps. We basically, we took the whole North County planning area and we segmented it into 3 quarters. Because the fourth quarter is the northwest quarter. And the northwest quarter is kind of like just packed with environmental features. So we just like, it's not in play. It's not something that we really want to impact with development. So we don't really want to talk about that because it's got so many environmental features. Okay. So we have 3 maps, and we have a northeast corridor. And in the map, you can see that we have the outline, actually we only have the upper outline here of this urban development boundary, but it's the dark black line basically. I'll show that. I'll show the complete. Okay. Here we go. So this area right here, right now, this urban development boundary is in the comprehensive plan. Okay, and there are a number of policies that dictate in the comprehensive plan what's supposed to happen in that urban development boundary. But urban development boundaries are a tool that are used across the state because it's an attempt to spatially or geographically determine where more intense development should be promoted.
Where is that grant?
It's wrapped around Crestview. Crestview would be everything here that's in sort of a white color. And so it's basically wrapped around the existing boundaries of Crestview. And so, again, our tiered system is starting to think about, okay, we have an existing urban development boundary, where do we want to have future development? So we have a lot of existing infrastructure in this boundary. We have the existing sanitary sewer plant and provision of sewer in much of this area, not all of it though.
So the gigasite is outside of the urban area, correct?
The gigasite is outside of the urban development boundary. So, in our thinking, again, we want to hear from you, and this is what we did last night too. Like after we did this presentation, we kind of asked folks to come up and tell us what they thought and write it down. But in our thinking, if the gigasite is going to be what's already been determined as an opportunity for job development, then maybe we want to include that in the urban development boundary. Because it's, well, it could be a tier 1 or it could be a tier 2. We want to hear what you have to say.
Are they already planning on putting the sewer treatment plant there?
Yeah, there's we have the dock right here.
20 acres or something like
Yeah. So that's coming. We also have here the projected bypass. So one could say, I'm not saying you have to say or think about it, but one could say you have an urban development boundary, and we could we could have a little bit more of this area in the urban development boundary, and then if we were going to define the tier 2, one could say, since it seems like the county is going to make investment in this bypass over time, that maybe parts of this area be included in tier 2. One could say that. Not saying that that's what everybody would feel.
that. You said the proposed bypass, so you're talking about.
Proposed.
The one they're doing now.
And then everything else would be outside and would be sort of in tier 3 and really keep the character. Now,
Modifications to the conditions allowing increases in basis within agricultural and rural residential land uses shall be considered. You have that even in tier 3. So even in tier 3, you're basically saying, if you wanted variation, yeah. Well, how does it?
Make it urban.
well, we want to hear from you on that.
I'm
But I,
I'm sorry, could you repeat what you just said?
So it's here, it's verbiage on this, it says modifications to the conditions allowing increases in base density within agricultural and rural residential land uses shall be considered.
Okay, so, correct. So I just want to take a moment to clarify intent, okay? As we have talked about extensively, there are conditions that provide an increase in density in agriculture from 1 to 10 up to 1 to 1, and from rural residential from 1 to 5 to 2 to 1. You could modify that. You could modify to increase, but you can also modify to decrease.
Well, that would be nice.
You're actually saying whatever the board decides they want to do.
So the board could always decide to change policy, right? But what we have the opportunity to discuss today is a tier 1, which this is where infrastructure already exists, okay? Tier 2 would be the area that it is planned to be expanding. Tier 3, there's no plans to extend this infrastructure. If you're not extending the infrastructure, right, and as Eric said before, part of the local planning analysis is taking into account what was in that public priorities report, which many of you contributed to keep that area within the rural character. So the modifications that are referenced in Tier 2, based on input from here, could be recommended to decrease.
So you need to put that in verbiage, because when you say just increase, then that automatically, you only have the word increase.
So
Because it won't,
I hear what you're saying.
it has the ability, but it won't ever decrease. It'll only increase.
Okay, here's the thing. These documents, and I appreciate everybody reading while we're here, these don't affect policy, okay? The recommendations coming out of that local planning analysis that we're trying to advance tonight are actually going to be amendments that the board can consider. That's policy, okay? So I appreciate that this verbiage could have been different, but I was trying to provide some clarity. Let's continue that discussion tonight to influence the actual policy, because that's what you all care about. I'm quite confident. Okay?
I have a question. Sir, I have a question. Can you go back to that section that says Spring Street? You were talking about the bypass. Is that the one that's off of Old Bethel Road coming out on 85 North?
yeah, it's, yes, I believe so.
Yeah. So that would affect the Old Bethel Road, and then also possible Lake Silver. That area out in there, it comes out on 85, close to Airport Road. Right? And all the green, is that agriculture?
Everything in green is agriculture.
Okay. Just wondering.
Okay. Thank you for the question.
So I did want to, you'll have a chance to take a look at this, but, so in our southwest corner, over here, these are already mapped, but these are the rural, there already is a rural overlay designation and mapping boundary around Holt, and there's one around Baker. So, I read you that policy, but the policy doesn't really have a lot of bone, I mean, it doesn't have a lot of meat on the bones. So, we want to get a little assistance from the group on putting some flesh on those bones. Defining what, defining. Yes. And defining it not only on a map, but like what are the characteristics? What do we want? If we have these overlays already designated, you may want to have an overlay on Laurel Hill too, might make sense. Laurel Hill, but how do we want this, how do we want the overlays to look as they develop over time?
So right now, there's no urban development boundary in Baker or Holt?
There's only a rural development overlay is what it's called. And it's this that's the only thing that governs it is this policy language. But it's not a lot, you know, because it doesn't really talk about it. What are we talking about?
Yeah.
We don't define what that's a little bit.
Exactly. And that, I mean, to tell you the truth, that's been a little bit of a struggle for us because we use terms like rural, suburban, urban, and we have a sense of what those means based on where we work and being in this business, but we don't really know what you think it means. Okay, so we want to try to talk about that a little bit tonight because that's going to help us decide how we're going to, put our recommendations together.
On that map that you have of the southwest, on the blue, what does that represent?
I didn't hear what you said.
What does the blue represent?
The blue is all water areas.
No, I am state forest.
Oh, state forest, I'm sorry.
Nothing's wrong. Because our land goes up 2 miles to the river, and it's off of Picky Creek Road. There's two blue there that goes north of Holt, out to Baker.
Well, what I want to say is this is a perfect opportunity because remember these reports are in draft form. And we got comments last night from some folks that said, hey guys, you didn't really address this. So we need to address some of those things.
What is yellow?
This is a yellow is low density residential. Let me just finish up the presentation and we'll have some time for questions. So perfect segue, defining rural, suburban, and urban. What do we mean by those terms? So we just threw a couple of slides together for you to think about it, So conservation, well, we probably would all agree with this kind of slide, that kind of represents conservation. Agriculture. Rural residential, so you think maybe a homestead on a large piece of property, basically. You can see a little development plan down here. A little higher density, low density residential, so you go from rural residential to a little bit higher density. Do we all know what mixed use is talking about? It's just mixing residential and office and retail. It's sort of like what you see sometimes when you come into a traditional downtown, because you could see a restaurant, a bookstore, the post office. Sometimes you'll have a 2-story building and it'll have a living unit above it. That's what we mean by mixed use. It's just like mixing up all those uses together when you're coming into a particular area. Medium density residential, so now we're going from rural residential to low density residential, and then medium density residential has a different feel to it. It's a little bit more units, a little bit more dense. Starting to get into what a suburb looks like, more of a suburban pattern. Tighter homes on tighter sites. Cul-de-sac. High density residential. Now we're talking we're starting to go a little bit more vertical here. We don't see a lot of this in Okaloosa County. Doesn't mean it can't happen in certain areas, but we don't see a lot of it. Some more mixed use. Maybe a little bit more intense. It's got a little bit more intense residential. It's a little bit more vertical. It's got the open spaces and gathering spaces. So we really want to know, what do these terms kind of mean to you? Because if we have these overlays in the comprehensive plan, and they're already being applied to Baker and Holt, then we need to know what types of development patterns do you think are appropriate for those?
Got a question?
And that's our presentation. And what, okay,
So, the terms you're using are not the terms that are defined by the development code. We need to line up. They're not using suburban, rural, like that. They're doing ag, rural. But, as a
yeah, well, I just want to make, well, I guess what we were trying to do with this is just try to give you a picture and think about, like, if you're thinking that these overlay areas should be very sparsely developed and really rural residential, then we're just supposed to jog your understanding so that you can give us that.
Okay, I understand what
Yeah.
you're saying, but if we're gonna be here tonight making specific recommendations for comp planning and development, we gotta have a language, saying what I think of residential.
Okay. Okay.
Fair point on the categories. I will tell you, it's always really difficult when you're showing pictures of these things, the density, the character. But it's important to start to have the conversations, because what rural character means, you know, to this group is important to document and understand. We've had that conversation a lot. I'd like to pivot a little bit, and if I could, and Laura, if you could come up and help take some notes. I want to go back to, and to the point where we're going to start to develop some policies. I think if we spend some time tonight talking about the tier system, it would be of great value to us as we advance these policies. I want to start with where we're looking at tier 1, because I don't think we need a lot of discussion on it. Tier 1 should be driven purely by where the infrastructure is now. And a lot of that's within the urban development boundary. There may actually be some areas outside that we evaluate, should that still be in the urban development boundary. But let's just think about tier 1 being that area that has, you know, water, sewer, roads, the infrastructure is already in place, as decisions have already been made. With that, the tier 2 areas, we're looking at planned infrastructure, okay? So what I'd like to do is maybe get your thoughts on, as you're evaluating a tier 2 area, what should we be thinking about in looking at that tier 2 area? Yes, ma'am.
I guess I just have one question with the tiers, like specifically with like Holt, Baker. Are we classifying that as tier 1? I mean, I guess because there's infrastructure there, but it's not, in my opinion,
Okay.
so are we categorizing Holt, Baker areas into 1? I mean, what?
It's a great question. Thank you for that. All right, so let's think about 2 tools at our disposal that Eric mentioned in the presentation. The first is the urban growth boundary, okay? The second are those rural overlays. So what I want to do is to focus, and for those of you who can see, this is the existing urban development boundary around Crestview, okay? So it does not extend west of the river, right, into Baker and Holt. It doesn't extend up to Laurel Hill. Let's talk about the area surrounding Crestview right now, where we have the urban development boundary. Let's talk about a tier 2 in that general area. What we want to talk about for Baker and Holt, those have existing rural overlays, I want to have a discussion about what should be included in those rural overlays, because those can be examined and we can put regulations in for those. And we think that Laurel Hill is a candidate to have that overlay too. The comprehensive plan says Baker and Holt shall have those overlays, but it doesn't, you know, and again, I think Laurel Hill has the opportunity too. Yes, ma'am.
I think one of the things that we're also missing an opportunity to look at is, I mean, I'm living in Baker and that's a big part for me, but also you have the Dorcas area, and that's actually growing up rather rapidly, and now something that your study may not have taken into because it's a newer development, they don't even have a fire department anymore. But yet, there's still building a lot of houses, and right there at the border of Walton County, I saw that there's like 2,400 more houses close to home. I think that that's something that now has changed from when y'all originally started, because that actually puts a strain on the system that's already there. And then also, even services like, for example, my mom had to be transferred from Twin Cities ER to another hospital. And it took us from noon until 2 o'clock in the morning to get a transport, an ambulance, and finally Okaloosa gave up and sent somebody from Panama City. We have people coming all the way from Panama City to transport our patients who she was in for heart issues, to transport our patients from an ER to a heart facility because we don't have enough to go around. And that was in Niceville. That's not even out here in the boonies. You know, we don't, the infrastructure that is there, it's not even adequate for what Crestview has in its boundary. And they're adding more and more. I mean, we have the fire department not even getting asked what their opinion is before they add more, 300 more houses. I mean, the chief's right here and nobody asked them. That's the problem.
So Laura, I don't know if you caught all that. We're talking about Crestview Dorcas area, coordination with EMS fire service. Thank you.
And that actually leads into who would be taking the new big site over Full River Ranch. Because Dorcas and then that's Mossy Head, Dorcas, all of that is kind of right there next to them. So you're looking at more people, the airport's growing. You know, you have those things that are growing, which is great. But we're working on the same system. Are they adding more fire departments? Are they adding more EMS to what's already in Crestview?
And I appreciate that information and want to make sure that we get that down. I do want to emphasize that what we're talking about right now is a very high level macro system because, as we've discussed for those of you who were in Laurel Hill last night, there is an urban development boundary, but it is very hard to distinguish development inside or outside your urban development boundary right now. There are not 3 tiers right now. There's 1 tier, and it's 245,000 acres. Okay, so by creating the tiered system to say like this is where the infrastructure is right now, this is where it's planned, then we can we got a smaller area to start thinking about. Okay, this is where development's coming. How do we make sure our response times are where they need to be? You know, police, fire, schools, all of those important planning considerations. Because when you're trying to plan across development across 245,000 acres, that becomes very difficult. So that's where the tier system can help get us to that next level of granularity that you're talking about. Yes, sir.
Question I got is, I know that this is already a done deal. I mean, without something input, you know, you get input time. But just cross the road to me, like, we got like 76 lots that have 49 acres.
Yep.
Or a lot farm. And that's why I'm waiting for houses per acre, so we talked about earlier on, 1 house per 10 acres. How much of it does this
So the question is this a done deal? How much is a done deal?
For instance, they say you go along the road, whatever, you get a light sign, you don't even know that, blah, blah. Then when the thing turns yellow, you got self-pay, boy, hey, what's going on? That's too late.
Right.
That's the done deal.
So, what I want to be clear, I understand your concern. We've talked a lot about there is a lack of predictability, where development's going to go, what it's going to look like, okay? So again, we're moving towards that. What I can tell you is there's not a plan behind the curtain, right, that we know about that we're going to unveil at some later time. As I stand here today, I don't know exactly what it's going to look like, what we put forth in that local planning analysis is part of why we're having this conversation here. So I understand your concerns. No, there's not a plan that's baked that we're going to unveil at some point. It's still in process.
I'm not really concerned with that, say up there, and I'm really on all of a sudden they get over $3.
Right. Sure.
What I'm really accused of, you know, like, high density housing. When you
Right.
got 10 people between houses, out in the middle, you
Mhm.
can't get them back around the track.
Right. Right.
If you get on the interstate, you know, it's a call.
So,
You might get this going in the line.
right.
So, you know, uncontrolled, crowding,
Right. So that was, Laura, if you got that, it's uncontrolled high-density housing is the concern. Yes, ma'am.
I guess my concern is you presented a policy earlier, you said it's already in place, correct?
We shared an existing comprehensive plan policy. Yes.
Plan policy that our county should be following. So why is growth management improving high-density housing in an area that is already rural? And why is that getting improved?
You got this to back.
This is in place before you even came. How did that process occur? Rezone?
So, again, without knowing the specific development proposal that you're talking about,
One he's speaking about high-density, 4 houses per acre.
okay. So again, I'm not reacting to, I don't know the exact parcel and what the underlying land use was. But here's the thing. There are development entitlements in the current comp plan outside of the urban development boundary that again are hard to distinguish between what's outside the urban development boundary and what's inside. That's just what's in the plan today. And so by going through this process, the hope is that we can have a discussion and provide predictability, right? That if in tier 3, if we can establish this in this tier 3 area, an area that doesn't have infrastructure today, there are no plans to provide that kind of infrastructure, that the expectation should be that it is more rural, and that we can make changes that can help ensure that.
Yeah,
Right.
that's
Okay.
As only offices at this present time. When the law is black and white, that says they change it to what they want. Taking in consideration for that part, that's being done.
Okay, so what we have said consistently, both in public meetings and internal, is there's very clearly a lack of predictability in where development is going to occur and what it's going to look like. There is a glaring need for clarity within the comprehensive plan and the land development code that's going to help provide everyone, the community, elected officials, staff, with a very clear picture on what's allowed and what's not. And that's what we're trying to do through this tiered system. And I'm happy to keep answering questions. It would be really helpful if at some point that we start to talk about considerations through that tiered system, because that is what we're going to be using moving forward. I'm gonna start in the front and then just move back here with the questions. Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to understand, see if I understand you correctly. If we define tier 1 and tier 2, tier 3, you're protecting more of the land by designating it tier 3?
It is, okay. The tier system is a tool that we can use to create the comprehensive plan policy changes, okay?
It's a tool to get what we want, what we're saying?
If you contribute to the conversation about what we want in the tiers. So we do need to get to that at some point.
Defining the tiers is still.
What are some of the factors that you'd like to see, within the tiers? If there's specific areas that you think should not be in tier 1 or tier 2, that would be helpful.
Tier 1, yes.
Okay. The tiers don't exist right now, that's what I'm saying.
I think she's got a good point. Before we can move to tier 2, everybody needs to understand what tier 1 is. I know what you say as infrastructure, but does that mean because Milton Road is paved and it's got water, does that make it tier 1?
So, right.
Wait, let him answer.
Okay,
Does that
so,
make it tier 1?
so again, as we talked about earlier, we were sharing a comp plan policy. The tier system does not exist other than what we put in the report and we're talking about. So, what we have talked about internally and we have not finalized is tier 1, central water, sewer are the big ones. I mean, the road, we typically follow. But that's a big distinction, right? If tier 1 has central sewer, because nothing west of the Yellow River within Okaloosa County has central sewer.
So can that part stay tier 2 then? If we define tier 1.
So how about this? Just by a show of hands, okay, because I just want to facilitate the conversation. If in tier 1, when we talk about infrastructure, if you think that should include central water and central sewer, can you raise your hand?
Water, sewer, and road.
And roads, So,
And fire.
How are you gonna pay
Exa-
for it?
That's
okay.
Either more people come in or your taxes go up.
Make those guys build in the houses.
Okay. So we can have the discussion, but that was helpful. We've got that. Yes, ma'am. Yes. Yes. Okay.
Mixed use, right next door, is using my private road to access Highway 85 so they can go north on 85. They're trespassing.
Let's block it.
So,
The Flex Fitness people are coming across the
think-
pasture and coming out my
I think if
driveway.
we could get some more detailed information, in fact, what I'd like to do is to understand exactly where your property is so we can look at this.
But I want to know
more in
about
depth.
this tier 1 and such. We're still on septic. I don't want to necessarily have to hook up to sewer. We don't have sewer. Sewer is just going to bring more development, and we have so much development around, but by God, I want tier 3 and all the protections for the rural areas as protected as possible in agriculture.
Okay.
I do. But I want to know, do I have any protection for my land? Do I have property rights still? Or am I going to be eminent domain because they want to put a bunch of, already what they're doing in the neighbor, they put an extra building in there, an extra residence that they say is a guest house, and it's I'm
You
gonna
guys
start
can
saying-
explain
Can
that
she
you don't
opt
have
out
any
of
control
tier
over
1?
it.
Okay.
That you were
I
just-
don't, it's very hard for me to react without knowing exactly where.
It's a quarter mile from Publix, right next to Flex
Okay.
Fitness.
So let's,
And
let's talk, let me get one of the people to talk, we understand exactly where your house is, because that's the special consideration that we can talk to and understand. Yes, sir.
Restrict apartment complexes to just tier 1.
Okay.
They don't belong in Baker.
Apartments restricted to tier 1.
You guys are more just advisors, right? You're gonna advise, you're gonna give a study to the board, and they're gonna look at it and see if they wanna follow, correct?
More
You don't
than
have
this-
anything that you can say to make them do what we want them to do, correct?
So, more than the study, our scope, actually, we will be making specific
Recommendation.
policy recommended
Right.
changes to the comp plan and land development code.
But they
But
don't
yes,
have
your
to
elected
make-
officials are the ones who get to make the decision.
Right, they don't have to take them, they get to do what they want, no matter what you tell them, correct?
That is the way our democratic system works.
So you're an
yes.
advisor, you're gonna advise the board on what you think is correct and right, and the best way to grow the county.
Based on input we receive from the community and the data analysis that we
And studies
perform.
that you've done that show that. So, but then the board has no responsibility to take that advice. They can still just allow the unfettered growth that they've been allowing the whole time and pay you all your fee and you're done, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, with one caveat.
Correct.
The state of Florida statutes
Right.
requires cities and counties to have policies that discourage urban sprawl. Okay? So that, and there are 13 criteria that are listed within the statutes that describe what urban sprawl is. So beyond our recommendations, they have, just like every other county and city in the state, they do have requirements imposed by the state that they need to meet. So it's not just whether they want to listen to, I mean, it's not just our recommendation.
Right, right. They have guidelines they'll have to follow. But unlike the bridge on Highway 90 East going over Shoal River, has been condemned for over 25 years. And it's still being used, and they're developing, putting 2,400 more houses out that way without fixing the bridge. Okay? Is that in your infrastructure? Is that in your plan? Are roads and highways in your plans, in your recommendations? Or are you just making recommendations on everything else? Sewer, water, waterways?
We are not recommending specific infrastructure improvements as part of this study.
Okay, so you're not making any recommendations on roads or anything like that? You got the bypass on there, but that's only because that's been proposed by the county,
Correct.
correct?
Yes.
Okay, okay, so I just wanted to make sure I knew exactly where we're from.
Yeah,
So
appreciate
really,
that.
without any disrespect, this meeting doesn't mean a whole lot.
Sorry for that.
I mean, that's, what we're saying doesn't mean a lot. You're gonna write it up. But as we've seen already, the Okaloosa County Commissioners are just allowing unfettered growth without fixing the infrastructure. Like this young lady said, the fire department's gone.
So it's somewhat of a self-fulfilling prophecy if we say that it's not going to work and so we don't participate in a process.
Oh,
and
no,
make
no,
those
I'm not saying
recommendations.
you shouldn't.
So,
I mean, that's,
Yeah.
it's great what you're doing.
okay. So let's just, I understand your frustration, but let's just continue with, yes, sir. So the question is regarding farmland. So prime farmland, as defined by the USDA, based on soil types, is recognized within the comprehensive plan. There are density restrictions. Agricultural uses that have prime farmland are restricted to 1 unit per 10 acres.
Unless it's already off by the zoning.
Yes, sir.
Highway 4.
Hard to ask that.
4 houses that are going to be put in on 1 acre. Okay? That has been farmland. I've lived here for 52 years. How is that 1 house per 10 acres when you let somebody 2 years ago jump in there and say, okay, I bought this and I'm gonna put 4 houses on an acre, and the county approved it, and all of a sudden now there's a yellow sign out there talking about it. Is that not prime farmland, or is that?
I don't know, because I'm not looking at the specific parcel that you're talking about, so I can't tell you whether that is prime farmland or not. And again, and before, and I'll get to the next question, and you know, maybe we should change the format. I mean, I'm happy to hear the stories. I understand the frustration that people have about development that's occurring all across the county. But we're trying to talk through these tiers so that we can make policy recommendations that provide some increased predictability. So that development form that is within tier 1 or tier 2, within inside an urban development boundary, looks fundamentally different from what's occurring outside in those tier 3 areas. Trying to get input. Yes, sir.
So what are we trying to accomplish by the end of the meeting tonight? Are we doing actual comp plan, land development code input tonight, or are we just doing tiers tonight?
So I view having the discussion about tiers helps us develop those policies.
But when do we get to see that language?
The actual, Eric, are the actual text amendments within the local planning analysis? I believe so. So when that local planning analysis is posted, it will probably be next month. But like every other thing, there'll be the 2-week review period, but that's when that's coming. Yes, sir. Yes.
This is more of a statement. It goes back to some of the people who were in Holt last night, right? Our county elections had 24.7 people turn out, okay? As an elected official for a county with 220,400 people, I'll round down a little bit, what are we doing when we go home at night? Besides being pissed off, talking to our spouses about development stuff.
You have the same.
If you look at these meetings, and we have over 220,000 people in our county, and we have these meetings, and only 100 people are showing up, what does that tell elected officials? If we've got 100 people showing up, but then we've got 220,300 people not showing up, they probably don't care. So maybe we could do more to get them to care.
Well, maybe we don't trust people who aren't following the policy. And on top of that, we have a commissioner who is telling people not to participate in this study.
Oh, I get it.
That's an issue.
I get it, and they have meetings on the south side at 4 p.m.
Did you ask
I get it.
Mr. Mixon that yesterday or today when you met with him?
We did not.
Mr. Mixon, why are you telling people not to participate in this?
Okay, I'm gonna take a couple more questions, maybe about 5 more minutes. I'm happy to continue conversations, but I really do, we're gonna spread out these boards, and we have an opportunity to write stuff or meet with some. We'll get, yes, I will get to the question on the board. I'm gonna go just through the hands that we had yesterday.
Okay, I actually have something to ask maybe that we add to this. I think it would be maybe appropriate, and I'm not sure how it could be formed, but have a citizens advisory board that helps approve the developments that are supposed to go into tier 3, maybe even tier 2, and have them include one of the special designated fire districts. At least they would have some kind of representation. Also, like somebody from a farm area, like have the expertise, because when we do our civic duty and try to stop them from building 145 houses on prime farmland, the committee that we go in front of was made up of developers who actually earned money off of the development they're approving. And so that's where there's a lack of transparency. But if you had a citizens advisory board that's not actually made, like the commissioners don't appoint them, like maybe they can be elected, that could be helpful.
Okay, you got the Citizens Advisory Group, thank you for that. Yes, sir.
I think that part of the confusion is the definition in the comp plan about agriculture and prime farmland. There's a difference. But there's also built into the comp plan loopholes that allow the developer to get around that 1 unit per 10 acres, or even 1 unit per acre. In prime farmland, the prime farmland has to be available for farming. If a developer buys it and makes it not available for farming anymore, it's no longer considered prime farmland. So then they can develop it. My suggestion would be to start, close the loopholes on agriculture and prime farmland.
So tier 1, you could have those, and tier 2 and 3, no loopholes.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Yes, sir.
The county has underutilized housing because of their old laws. They have empty nesters in the county who have mother-in-law suites on their property, apartment over their garage on their property, or their house is so big that they don't need a big house, they can make it into a duplex for rental. But the county restricts rentals to a private property. If they left that restriction, you'll have a lot more housing in the county available. It makes sense.
Thank you. Okay, Lane?
Okay, couple of things. One, all these reports, by the way, are downloadable as PDFs, so they've really made it easy
Nobody
for you to look at.
Wayne, you got it.
Okay, all these reports on the website are downloadable as PDFs, and that makes them really easy to read and use, so I encourage you to do that, okay? So George and I and Eric have been talking a little bit about the tier system. What he's trying to tell you is, if you want restrictions in the comp plan, help him define the boundaries of those restrictions practically. So that's what this exercise is about. Now, I will point out, George tells us tier 1 urban development boundary is where infrastructure exists. The only sewer around here stops up here at Airport Road in the city limits. And we now have an urban development boundary that goes all the way up to Auburn Road. So there is no sewer infrastructure north of Airport Road. So that boundary would need to come back technically. So he's not talking about making the whole county into a tier 1 or developable land. We're talking about defining where we can have this infrastructure. The existing urban boundary is more likely tier 2, if you want to look at it from an existing infrastructure. I'd be more happy with that personally, but that's a different thing. So I just wanted to point that out. You're trying to set your restrictions so that you can make policy.
Thank you. We'll take last question, sir.
How many different perk tests does the county have?
How many?
Perk tests. In other words, I'm gonna build 40 houses over here on these 40 acres. I failed the first perk test and stopped right there, okay? Now, there's another one that ain't quite as in-depth as that one. I'll do that one. Oh, I didn't make that one? Let me go to the third. Oh, I passed. Here's the 40 houses on 40 acres. There should be one perk test. You don't make that perk test, you don't get it.
Elliot or Randy, I don't know if y'all wanted to, I'm not familiar with the process and how you.
Well, there is more than one perk test, I'm gonna tell you right now. And I have nothing to do with the county.
Regarding perk tests and the number of those.
That care. I know there's a perk test which has to be done in Baker.
I'm just asking county staff, because I don't know what the process is for that.
I'll answer.
Basically, road tests are done to determine the compatibility of the soil and what kind of road it is. So depending on what's being proposed, it may be necessary to have one of those action tests. Or road tests for stormwater ponds, septic tank, drain fields, and things like that. So that's why you would do action test and why you do a perk test. And the Department of Health, when they go out and assessing somebody who has an application for a septic tank, they're going to look at the kind of soils that are in that. They're also going to observe the field to make sure
that we're not gonna have flooding, or the septic tank is not gonna fail. So there could be more than one perk test per property, it depends on what's being proposed and what the needs are. As previously.
Yeah, but if you fail the first perk test, that ought to be it. You gotta be cut off. You know, if I go to the bank and say, I borrow $100,000, credit ain't good enough. Now I gotta run around looking for loopholes to borrow $100,000? No, I'm cut off. That's it. I ain't qualified to borrow $100,000. My credit ain't good enough. That's my opinion.
Well, yes, why the word was perk test
So I'm I want to point out, we've been talking about the 3 tiers. If you live, particularly if you live in Baker, Holt, or Laurel Hill, we have the other maps there that show a little more detail around those. The rural overlays have broad language in the comp plan. That language could be amended as part of this process, but also, the land development regulations can provide more specificity. How do you maintain the rural character of Baker through the land development regulations? That's input that we need. Same for Holt and Laurel Hill. We need that information and documents, so please, particularly if you live in those communities, don't leave without providing input for that. Yes, sir.
Sir, I think one thing we're asking is trying to clarify that. Tier 3 is the rural designation, correct?
Yes.
I think a lot of people they see a lot of houses. They think that they're already
I understand, and as I said at the outset, one of the things that we've heard and seen through the data is that it's very difficult to tell the difference in character between what's being developed inside the existing urban development boundary and throughout the county. There's very little distinction. So okay, and I understand your frustration about what's going on right now, but that's why we're trying to go through this so that we can make policy changes, so that you do have the opportunity to say, this is tier 3, this is rural. This needs to look different than what tier 1 inside the urban development boundary looks like.
I think a lot of people are concerned. It already just by development looks right now.
And I understand, but what we can do here is plan forward. Yes.
I'm thinking, what I'm hearing is this tier 2 last night when I first heard it, I agree with it. I think it's a good idea. What I'm hearing is, what do we do about the permits that have already been approved? Nothing. Nothing. But what we can do, and what tier 2 is, it's a fire break. If we establish a fire break using tier 2, they cannot go past that. We have to do a good job working with these folks, giving them objective criteria, not subjective criteria. For example, I hear this term all the time, infrastructure. What is infrastructure? It should be infrastructure, sufficient infrastructure should be A, B, C, D, and E. Number 1 is roads. How many vehicles per hour on a 2-lane county road maximum is part of that infrastructure, and part of the recommendation that goes with this package to expanding into tier 2. My guess is Route 4 is already at that max. 90 is pretty darn close to that max. So unless we can get them to adopt for a tier 2 fire break, the amount of traffic, specifically how many vehicles per hour, then we've lost. We need to get that fire break in, and that is the tier 2 line. Thank you.
Great. So I do want to have time so that we can start documenting stuff. I'm happy to stick around and just answer questions after, but I'm just going to go ahead and.
I got one more question.
Okay.
left-hand signs there on the road. Back in 1995, they had a hurricane. We're gonna put it online.